From assassinations, to falling off horses, to even dying on the toilet. This is how every English and British monarch died over the last 1,000 years. Edward the Confessor. Edward the Confessor ruled England for 24 years, known more for his piety than his power. He died on January 5, 1066, at Westminster Palace after months of failing health. He suffered from a stroke or kidney failure that left him bedridden and weak. On his deathbed, he named Harold Godwinson as his successor before passing away peacefully at age 62. His burial at Westminster Abbey made it the traditional coronation site for future English monarchs. Harold II. Harold Godwinson became king in January of 1066, but his reign lasted only 9 months. On October 14, 1066, he was killed at the Battle of Hastings, leading his army against William of Normandy. He was struck by an arrow and was cut down by Norman's sword in the final melee. His body was so mutilated it had to be identified by his mistress. But the man who killed him wouldn't die in battle, and with him came the Norman kings. House of Norman. William I. William the Conqueror spent 21 years securing the English throne. In 1087, while besieging Mons, his horse reared and he was thrown against the saddle pommel, rupturing his intestines. He died weeks later in agony. At his funeral, his bloated corpse wouldn't fit in the stone tomb. When attendants forced it in, his body burst, filling the cathedral with such a horrific stench that mourners fled, including the monks conducting the service. William II. William Rufus ruled for 13 years, hated by the church and distrusted by nobles. On August 2, 1100, while hunting in the New Forest, an arrow struck him in the chest. Walter Tyrrell claimed it was an accident, then fled immediately to France and never returned. William's brother Henry seized the treasury before the body was cold and took the crown. Murder or accident? No investigation ever happened. Henry I. Henry I ruled for 35 years, centralizing royal powers across England. On December 1, 1135, while in Normandy, he fell violently ill after eating lampreys, eel-like fish his doctors had warned him against. He died within days from severe food poisoning. His body had to be preserved in wine and salt for the journey back to England for burial. House of Blois. Stephen seized the throne from his cousin Matilda, Henry I's named successor. In 1135, triggering 19 years of civil war known as the Anarchy. By 1154, constant warfare had destroyed his health. He died on October 25th at Dover Priory from dysentery, his final days consumed by intestinal pain and internal bleeding. Even on his deathbed, Stephen was still negotiating terms of succession. His successor would restore order and found the Plantagenet dynasty. House of Plantagenet. Henry II. Henry II ruled for 35 years, building an empire from Scotland to the Pyrenees. By 1189, warfare with his own sons had broken him. He died on July 6th at Chinon Castle, weakened by dysentery and fever while his sons besieged him. Henry died bitter and defeated, reportedly cursing his children with his final breath. When servants stripped his body after death, they found he had been wearing a hair shirt in penance. Richard I. Richard the Lionheart spent most of his reign fighting crusades, barely visiting England. In March 1199, while besieging Chalice Castle in France, a crossbow bolt struck his shoulder. The arrowhead wasn't properly removed and gangrene set in. Richard died on April 6 from sepsis, 10 days after the wound. It's said that he forgave the archer who shot him and ordered the man released, though he was executed anyway after Richard's death. John Lackland. John inherited the largest empire in Europe, from Scotland to the Pyrenees. Within 15 years, he lost nearly all of it. By 1216, he was fighting a civil war while France invaded England. He fell ill during a campaign, likely from dysentery. John died on October 18th at Newark Castle, feverish and in pain. His last words were pleas for mercy and forgiveness for his sins against the church. Henry III. Henry III became king at age 9 and ruled for 56 years. He preferred building churches to fighting wars, which frustrated his nobles. By 1272, after decades of rebellions, his health was failing. He died on November 16th at Westminster Palace, likely from a stroke or heart attack. Westminster Abbey, which he had lavishly rebuilt, became his final resting place. He was the first king in over 200 years to die peacefully in his bed. Edward I. Edward I was known as the Hammer of the Scots. For his brutal campaigns, he ruled for 35 years, constantly at war. In 1307, at age 68, he was marching north for another Scottish campaign when his body gave out. He died on July 7th near Carlisle from dysentery contracted during the march. His dying wish was for his bones to be carried into battle against Scotland, but his son ignored this request. Edward II. Edward II inherited a powerful kingdom but proved incapable of ruling. He prioritized male favorites over governance, alienating his nobles. In 1314, he was destroyed at Bannockburn by the Scots. By 1326, his wife Isabella invaded and disposed him. Edward died in Berkeley Castle on September 21st, 1327, murdered with a red-hot poker in captivity. Edward III. Edward III ruled for 50 years, one of England's longest reigns. He started the 100 Years' War and won victories like Crécy and Poitiers. By his final years, he was weakened by strokes and reportedly suffering from senility. He died on June 21, 1377 at Sheen Palace from a massive stroke at age 64. In his final days, his mistress Alice Perrers allegedly stripped the rings from his fingers while he lay dying. Richard II. Richard II became king at age 10 and initially showed promise. By his 30s, he ruled as a tyrant, arresting nobles and seizing lands. In 1399, while campaigning in Ireland, his cousin Henry Bolingbroke invaded. Richard returned to find his support collapsed. Henry imprisoned him in Pontefract Castle, where Richard died in February 1400, likely starved to death. His body was publicly displayed in London to prove his death. His cousin seized power, founding the House of Lancaster. House of Lancaster. Henry IV. Henry IV seized the throne from Richard II, but faced constant rebellions. By 1413, his health had mysteriously deteriorated with a severe skin disease and recurring strokes. His face became so disfigured that some believed it was divine punishment for usurping the crown. He collapsed while praying in Westminster Abbey's Jerusalem chamber and died on March 20th at Westminster. Henry V. Henry V was England's warrior king, famous for his victory at Agincourt in 1415. He spent his reign fighting in France, claiming the French throne. In 1422, while besieging Meaux, he contracted dysentery in the unsanitary military camps. Henry died on August 31st at Vincennes Castle, just 35 years old. Henry VI. Henry VI became king at 9 months old and suffered severe mental illness with episodes of complete incapacity. His weakness triggered the Wars of the Roses. Edward of York defeated him in 1461. Henry was briefly restored in 1470, but Edward crushed his forces and imprisoned him in the Tower. Henry was murdered there on May 21st, 1471. And the House of York took power. House of York. Edward IV. Edward IV seized the throne in 1461, lost it in 1470, then fought back and ruled until 1483. In April that year, he fell suddenly ill and died on April 9th at Westminster Palace, likely from pneumonia or a stroke, at only 40 years old. Some suspected poison, but no evidence was ever found. Edward V. Edward V became king in April 1483 at age 12. His uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was appointed protector but declared Edward and his brother illegitimate. In June, Richard seized the throne as Richard III. Edward and his brother were moved to the Tower of London and never seen alive again. They disappeared in summer 1483, presumably murdered. Bones believed to be theirs were discovered in the tower in 1674, but have never been conclusively identified. Richard III. Richard III seized the throne in 1483 after declaring his nephews illegitimate. His reign was plagued by suspicion and rebellion. On August 22, 1485, Henry Tudor invaded and Richard met him at Bosworth Field. Richard led a desperate charge at Henry, was unhorsed and cut down. He died from multiple head wounds, the last English king killed in battle. His body was buried in a Leicester church, lost for centuries until rediscovered under a car park in 2012. The Tudor dynasty would begin with a quieter death. House of Tudor. Henry VII. After winning the throne on the battlefield, Henry VIII spent 24 years securing the Tudor dynasty. He ruled through careful financial management and ruthless suppression of rivals. By 1509, his health was failing. He suffered from tuberculosis and possibly gout. Henry died on April 21st, at Richmond Palace, likely from heart failure. He was 52 years old. Henry VIII. Henry VIII transformed England by breaking with Rome and establishing the Church of England. He married 6 times, executing 2 wives. By his final years, Henry was morbidly obese with a massive ulcerated leg wound that never healed. He could barely move and had to be carried everywhere in a specially designed chair. Henry died on January 28, 1547 at Whitehall Palace, likely from kidney failure caused by his infected leg and obesity. Edward VI. Edward VI became king at age 9, a sickly child raised as a fervent Protestant. By 1553, tuberculosis was killing him. He coughed blood, lost weight rapidly, and his skin turned gray. Edward died on July 6th at Greenwich Palace, just 15 years old. His death sparked a succession crisis as nobles tried preventing his Catholic half-sister from taking the throne. Mary took it anyway. Mary I. Mary I became England's first ruling queen. Determined to restore Catholicism, her reign became infamous for burning nearly 300 Protestants, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. By 1558, she was seriously ill with what was likely uterine or ovarian cancer. Mary died on November 17th at St. James Palace, aged 42, having failed to produce an heir. Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I ruled for 45 years, never marrying and transforming England into a Protestant power. By 1603, she was 70 and declining. She developed pneumonia and refused to lie down, fearing she wouldn't wake. Elizabeth died on March 24th at Richmond Palace after days of fever, leaving no heir and ending the Tudor dynasty. The Scottish king who inherited brought the Stuart dynasty to England. House of Stuart. James I. James I united English and Scottish crowns in 1603. He believed in divine right and clashed with Parliament. By 1625, his health was failing with kidney disease and arthritis. He suffered a massive stroke in early March and lingered for weeks, unable to speak clearly. James died on March 27th at Theobald's house from stroke complications and kidney failure. He had been suffering from violent dysentery in his final days. Charles I. Charles I believed in divine right and refused to compromise with Parliament, triggering civil war in 1642. After 6 years, Charles lost. Parliament tried him for treason. He refused to recognize the court, declaring kings answered only to God. On January 30th, 1649, he was beheaded outside the banqueting house, the only English monarch executed by his subjects. He wore 2 shirts to prevent shivering from the cold, not wanting to appear afraid. Charles II. Charles II was restored to the throne in 1660 by Parliament after 11 years of Republican rule. He ruled for 25 years with a lavish court lifestyle. In early February 1685, he suffered a sudden seizure during his morning routine. He lingered for 4 days from what was likely a stroke. Charles died on February 6th at Whitehall Palace, aged 54. His deathbed conversions to Catholicism was kept secret until after his death. James II. James II became king in 1685 as England's last Catholic monarch. He tried converting Protestant England back to Catholicism, ignoring Parliament. When his Catholic son was born in 1688, Protestant England panicked at the prospect of a Catholic dynasty. Parliament invited William of Orange to invade, and James fled to France without fighting. He died in exile on September 16, 1701, from a brain hemorrhage after years of failed attempts to reclaim his throne. Mary II. Mary II ruled jointly with her husband William III after disposing her father James II in 1688. She was deeply troubled by overthrowing her own father but remained committed to Protestant England. In December 1694, she contracted smallpox during a visit to Hampton Court. The disease progressed rapidly despite the best medical care available. Mary died on December 28th at Kingston Palace, aged 32. William was devastated and never remarried. William III. After Mary's death in 1694, William III ruled alone. In 1701, he fell from his horse when it stumbled over a molehill, breaking his collarbone. The injury seemed minor at first, but complications developed and he contracted pneumonia. William died on March 8, 1702 at Kingston Palace, age 51. Jacobites celebrated the molehill as their unlikely hero, toasting the little gentleman in black velvet. Anne became queen in 1702 after William III's death. She endured 17 pregnancies, but no child survived, leaving her devastated and ill. By 1714, she suffered from gout, dropsy, and severe obesity. On August 1st, she suffered a stroke at Kingston Palace and died shortly after, aged 49. Her death ended the Stuart dynasty and brought the Hanoverians to Britain. House of Hanover, George I. George I arrived from Hanover in 1714, barely speaking English and deeply unpopular with his new subjects. He spent much of his reign eager to return to Germany and brought his German mistress to England. In June 1727, while traveling to Hanover, he suffered a stroke in his carriage. George died on June 11th at Osnabrück, far from the kingdom he never embraced. He was buried in Hanover, not England. George II. George II ruled for 33 years, the last British monarch to lead troops into battle at Deddington in 1743. On October 25, 1760, he rose early at Kingston Palace and went to the toilet. His valet heard a loud crash. George had suffered an aortic rupture and collapsed on the floor. He died almost instantly from a massive internal hemorrhage at age 76. George III. George III ruled for nearly 60 years, the longest British reign yet. He's remembered for losing the American colonies and suffering severe mental illness in his later years. By 1820, he was blind, deaf, and mentally incapacitated, unable to recognize his own family. He died on January 29th at Windsor Castle from pneumonia at age 81. George IV. George IV had spent years as Prince Regent while his father was incapacitated. By the time he became king in 1820, his health was ruined by excessive drinking and overeating. He suffered from gout, obesity, and heart disease. George died on June 26, 1830 at Windsor Castle from internal bleeding caused by a ruptured stomach vessel. He was so obese at death that his coffin had to be specially enlarged to accommodate his body. William IV. William IV became king at age 64, never expecting to inherit the throne after serving in the Royal Navy. He ruled for 7 years, presiding over major reforms including the Reform Act of 1832. By 1837, chronic bronchitis and heart disease had weakened him severely. William died on June 20th at Windsor Castle from pneumonia and heart failure at age 71. His final words were, the church, expressing concern for religious matters. Victoria. Victoria became queen at 18 and ruled for 63 years, the longest British reign yet. She survived multiple assassination attempts and presided over the British Empire's height. By 1901, she was 81 and failing health. Victoria died on January 22nd at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight from a cerebral hemorrhage and old age. She was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, including her grandson Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Her son would rule for less than a decade and bring the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to the throne. House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. Edward VII. Edward VII waited nearly 60 years to become king, finally ascending at age 59 after his mother Victoria's death. He ruled for just 9 years but transformed the monarchy into a more modern institution. By 1910, he suffered from severe bronchitis worsened by his habit of smoking 20 cigarettes and 12 cigars daily. Edward died on May 6 at Buckingham Palace from a heart attack, aged 68. His last words were, "No, I shall not give in." House of Windsor, George V. George V became king in 1910 and changed the royal house name to Windsor in 1917 during World War I to sound less German. By January 1936, he was dying from chronic bronchitis and heart failure caused by decades of heavy smoking. His physician administered lethal doses of morphine and cocaine on January 20th to end his suffering and ensure his death made morning papers rather than evening tabloids. George died at Sandringham, aged 70. Edward VIII. Edward VIII became king in January 1936, but abdicated after just 11 months to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. The Church of England forbade the king from marrying a divorced woman. He spent the rest of his life in exile as Duke of Windsor. Edward died on May 28, 1972 in Paris from throat cancer at age 77. He was the only British monarch to voluntarily give up the throne. Queen Elizabeth II visited him just days before his death. George VI. George VI never expected to be king, thrust onto the throne after his brother abdicated. He had a severe stammer but overcame it to become a symbol of British resilience during World War II. By the late 1940s, he developed lung cancer from heavy smoking. He underwent surgery in 1951 to remove part of his lung. George died in his sleep on February 6, 1952, at Sandringham from a coronary thrombosis at age 56. Elizabeth II. Elizabeth II became queen in 1952 at age 25 and ruled for 70 years, the longest reign in British history. She witnessed massive social change, the end of the British Empire, and the transition to the modern Commonwealth. By 2022, she was 96 and increasingly frail, after the death of her husband Prince Philip the previous year. Elizabeth died on September 8th at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Her death certificate listed the cause as old age. Charles III. Charles III became king on September 8, 2022 at age 73, making him the oldest person to ascend the British throne. He had waited longer than any heir in British history. As of 2025, Charles continues to reign. His death remains unwritten.